tuned till the end. So the first fold we're going to look at is the pipe fold. You can imagine it as a series of half cylinders, each of which is going to lead back towards a singular tension point. You see this type of fold in curtains, and each of those cylinders has their own individual tension point on the rod above it. If you pull on one portion of the fabric, you'll see a deformation that occurs in the pipe folds, flattening out those cylinder forms and pulling them all towards one direction. What we see with the pipe folds on this cloak is that they become flattened by the force of the back pushing against them. So you always want to imagine cloth as a summation of all the forces that are acting on it. We can imagine taking one of these cylinders and then pressing them down to flatten that circular face on the top. If we add a third force, say the force of the floor pushing up on this piece of cloth, you'll introduce new folds, and in this case that'll become a HalfLock fold. But we'll talk about that a bit later on. I've found that a useful strategy for drawing cloth is to follow its silhouette edge and then connect back towards its tension point. And here once again I'm demonstrating how the forces are going to act on cloth. You see as those folds get closer to the floor, those cylindrical forms flatten out. Similar to the pipe fold, the drop fold will have a singular tension point. However, in this case, each of those folds will be connecting back towards the same exact tension point rather than their own individual points, as in the tension on a curtain rod. The practical effect of this is that instead of them being cylindrical, the folds in this case are conical. Once again, the way I'm sketching this is placing in that silhouette edge and then connecting back towards the tension point. You'll see these folds occurring on long drapery slung over a shoulder, or even in loose-fitting pants when the knee is bent. Emphasizing those cast shadows really helps separate the layers of cloth from one another. And also pay attention to the pattern that wraps around the edge of that cloth. I'm just repeating that silhouette edge a little bit higher up. The outer edge of the drop fold is similar to a sine curve. And once again, rather than those folds being half cylinders, they now take the form of a cone. In the following sketch, a skirt is going to be outstretched between two hands. The fabric that's on the left is experiencing only one tension point, which is going back to the hand, so it creates a drop fold. However, the fabric between the hand and the waist is experiencing 2 points of tension, so it creates a diaper fold, which we're going to talk about in the following section. As far as the style goes, I like to feather in these shadow shapes by using some hatching lines that all lead directly back to the tension point. So as I mentioned earlier, fabric that's stretched between two tension points creates what's called a diaper fold. This fold appears like a series of the letter U that gradually increase in slope as they go further away from the tension point. That fabric hanging off of the left shoulder is creating a drop fold, but the fabric suspended between the two shoulders is exhibiting a diaper fold. Now, I don't have children and I have no idea what tying a diaper is like, but I would imagine that it has two tension points since that's what the fold is named after. We'll address it further on in the video, but all of that fabric that's being compressed into the waistband there is creating HalfLock folds. Drawing this in a head-on view, you can see that letter U shape motif a little bit more clearly, and also how I'm hatching in those shadow shapes. We see the same diaper fold motif occurring once again between the neckline of this girl's dress. Notice that each of those folds has a distinct volume to it, and you have to account for that in your sketch. And then all of the folds below the waistline are pipe folds, because that belt is acting like a curtain rod. On this cloak that I'm drawing now, there's a button up on the left shoulder, which is creating a drop fold for all that cloth that's to the left of it. The outstretched arm on the right introduces a new tension point, which is generating those diaper folds between the button on the left shoulder and the arm. Spiral folds occur when you take a pipe fold and add a twisting force to them. You'll see here that as the girl twists her torso, the fabric on the back of the coat pulls towards the tension point on the left shoulder. I once again just use a soft hatching to indicate those shadow shapes between the folds. The same effect is occurring here on this second image. All of that fabric is twisting up towards the left shoulder. Spiral folds will often occur as well when you outstretch the arm. Try to imagine it as just a pipe fold or a twisted tube stretching over a cylinder. The HalfLock occurs anytime you compress fabric. You can see here in this side view that when you bend the arm, the fabric on the inner portion of the arm bunches up, and the fabric on the outer silhouette is stretched over the elbow. You can imagine it here by taking this flat piece of fabric and taking the top ends and pulling them together. The fabric will taper outwards as it moves away from the point of compression. Now, since most garments are created by continuous sheets of fabric, what you'll end up seeing is that the HalfLock folds create this shadow shape that's similar to an elongated U. And as I brought up in my previous video on cloth, the looser that a fabric is, the more of these HalfLock folds will occur. So here we're seeing HalfLock folds occurring on the inner portion of the arm and in the fabric that's going to be tucking into those boots. On this next cloak, you're going to see HalfLock folds occur in a lot of different places. The arm that's coming into view right now has a bunch of HalfLock folds occurring at that elbow, and even one towards the wrist. There's a series of them occurring around the waistband as all of that loose fabric is being compressed into the belt. Emerging from the bottom of the waistband, you're going to see a series of HalfLock folds that then taper out into pipe folds. And then the last place we see a HalfLock fold is up in here on the hood, as there's a lot of excess fabric, so it's starting to fold over itself. The leg here in the front deforms that pipe fold and pulls the fabric forward along with it. The last type of fold I'm going to talk about today are inert folds, which end up being a combination of all the aforementioned folds. They're much harder to predict since there's a lot of random forces acting on them, so if you want, I think the best way to study these is just study from real life reference. Or do what I did and just throw a sheet onto your futon. Okay, from here I'm going to get a bit more structural with everything, and just show you how the underlying forms of the body impact the folds above. All of the form breakdowns that I'm going to be using for characters are discussed in previous videos of mine, so if this part is confusing to you, I'd suggest going back to a couple of the other videos on this subject first. But long story short, I'm using organic shapes and adding form to them by placing in ellipses. This is really similar to the Loomis maquette that he uses for the figure. And then on top of that, I'm going to be placing in cylinders for the arms. So you really need to be aware of how the minor axis and degree of ellipses work before you can try to engage in this. When the arms are at the side, we're seeing the full length of those cylinders, and the degree on those cylindrical faces is very shallow. As the arms are outstretched towards the camera, the degree of those ellipses become very wide, and we see just a little bit of the length because they're very foreshortened. And then once again, the arms are going to be up in the air, so we're seeing the full length, and the degree of those ellipses is very shallow. Now on top of this, I'm going to start placing in some fabric, and we can see some similar shapes to what we saw before. We're getting HalfLock in the armpits, drop folds occurring from the shoulders, Now as the arms start to go up, we're seeing diaper folds occurring between the two shoulders. Some half-locking occurring in the back. As well as half-locks up on top of the shoulders. And then spiral folds going around the arms. Now the arms elevated above the head, we're seeing those diaper folds very clearly. And pipe folds are being created towards the bottom. And those spiral folds going up onto the arms from the armpit. Okay, I'm going to draw another series of motions with fabric using a similar maquette underneath. We're seeing drop folds coming from the shoulders, half-locks in the inner arm, and some half-lock folds going into the right armpit, as well as spiral folds emerging out onto the rest of the arm. The skirt tucking underneath the leg creates a nice long half-lock shape. Okay, now I'm going to take that same maquette and just pull it forward. And what we're going to see are spiral folds inserting under the armpit because that shoulder is pulling the fabric forward. Once again, a half lock in the skirt, and some drop folds occurring at the knees. In the final maquette, the ribcage is still pulled forward, but it's twisted back. This creates some spiral folds that are going from the waistline to the armpit, and from the armpit onto the arms. The bending of the left arm also creates that half lock on the inner elbow. Alright, now in this final set of movements, the character is going to be spinning around with a long jacket on. Since the torso and pelvis are twisted at opposing angles, fabric is going to be pulled up into the armpit from the back. Because the person is in the action of spinning, the cape is pulled outwards, creating that S-shaped curve. Now, in order to rotate these forms, you do want to be aware of how vanishing points are going to turn as the body turns as well. That's why it's crucial to understand those dynamic sketching techniques before jumping into anything this complicated. That being said, we're still seeing those half-lock folds on the arm. We're seeing spiral folds occurring in the cape going up onto the left hip. And notice how the outer edge of the fabric is almost always creating this wave pattern. And in this final shot, the body has slowed down and stopped, but the fabric on the cape has still continued to move, so it catches a bunch of air and creates this very large plume. You're still seeing those spiral folds going up into the armpit. And there's the cape expanded outwards because it's still in motion even after the person has stopped. Alright everybody, that's about it for this week. If you made it through, congrats on sitting through a 20-minute video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, and I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to those 2 channels I mentioned earlier. And if you like this type of content, consider supporting on Patreon. $5 a month can get you access to all of the future Gumroads that I put out every month. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all soon. Take care.